Tansi dito temtek, kinuisqueu itsigasen. This is Cathy Richardson, and on this beautiful morning in Aotearoa, New Zealand, I have Bren Balcombe with me, and I am on the unceded lands of the Abenaki in southern Quebec in the middle of a big snowstorm, which started yesterday. And yeah, I'm just delighted to be here with Bren. So we're going to talk about a few things if we get to them in this podcast. I'm going to ask Bren to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his work as a counselor. And I know that, Bren has been engaging with response-based ideas for over 10 years now. And he invited us all down to Hawke's Bay in 2015 for a dignity conference, which was fabulous. And Bren also has a practice in Buddhism where some of the practices are complemented by response-based ideas or vice versa. So he's going to talk about some of these things when we get there. Hey, Bren.
Kia ora.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Te Matau Maui, which is the fishhook of Maui, in Aotearoa. So Aotearoa has two islands, I guess. Well, it has many islands actually, but two main islands, maybe three. And this place here is Ahiriri, and this is the tribal lands of Kahungunu. For at least 800 years or so, minimum, I think. And it's also stolen land that we're living on here. And yeah, so that's this is where I'm located. Yeah, I don't know, what do you say?
Yeah, well, where did your people come from?
Pardon? Where do my people come from? All right.
From?
On my father's side, they come from Gothenburg in Sweden. Arrived in Aotearoa in about, it was 1871, so about 101 years before I was born. And on my mother's side, they were mainly Scottish, Douglas, a bit of Irish Terry, and Belloch. So lots of tribes that are Nordic, lots of Nordic tribes, hence the white guy.
I feel like I should have known that about you, and also because your last name is sort of Swedish, and I have Swedish ancestry too, even though I'm Métis. So that's another point in common that we have that we can explore next time we're together.
Sure.
Yeah, so you have a counseling practice there?
Yeah, so been working in the counseling field for about 25 years now. I trained in my education and training initially, my academic training was in psychotherapy. So, in terms of response-based practice, that's quite a handicap. I so wish that my entry into this kind of world was family therapy. That would have been so much more helpful. But yeah, so that process has been interesting in itself. But yes, so I've worked in Hawke's Bay, Te Matau Maui, for most of that time, and working with all sorts of situations for people, working alongside people. Counseling practice. It's interesting that these days I don't know that I would. It's hard to call it counseling. I'm not sure what it is we do, and I've always had that struggle to think what is it that we do. I mean, other than trying to have really good conversations with people, and that's really key for the ideas of response-based practice, because language is so important to me. But I guess I think so. deeply into language that sometimes it just kind of hurts my head.
Yeah, and it's true that we don't really have all the words that we need to express ourselves more accurately, or in terms of what we really want to articulate. I think of, counseling, supervision. I mean, like you say, what we try to do when we work collaboratively is try to level the power dynamics between people as much as possible, or use power effectively to advocate for people if that's what they need, and to create some safety so we can get into some really, meaningful conversations, right? Helpful conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's social justice work, but at kind of a low key level. It's not at the kind of systemic level. It's kind of one conversation at a time, and I think that's incredibly meaningful. It's meaningful to me. And seems to be meaningful with the people I talk to as well. Keeping people in the active, responsive position is probably one of the key things about what I keep thinking about. And I know that I think and breathe these ideas every day, and been doing that for what feels like quite a long time now. Not as long as you guys, obviously, but it is my everyday. It's in my head every day. I'm thinking about it all the time. How are we talking? How are we doing this? And my objection to the word counseling a little is that for me, therapy or counseling is something that's done to somebody, rather than and we can't kind of separate professional power, etc. But as you say, it's about trying to break down some of those power dynamics and really try to make it as collaborative as possible in the work. So that's 100% where I stand. And the way that I try to do that most is by maintaining that kind of in my heart and in my mind and in the way that I'm thinking about things, that people are always active and responsive, that they always have pre-existing ability, and so I stem a lot of my questions around that. So if I'm in conversation with somebody and it feels like we kind of hit some sort of full stop of sorts, like um, like a place where a person's starting to describe themselves as kind of more like an object in a way, or affected by things, I'm really, I think my curiosity pops out about there, and we'll start to go, oh, tell me more about that.
Yeah, for
How's
sure.
that?
Yeah.
Trying to figure, try to see where that person is responding and what they're up against. And I think, often people are, can be quite critical on themselves and be quite hard on themselves. But less often they are, I think, in my experience, kind of putting that against what they're up against. It just seems that way. So the wonderful thing about working with response-based practice is because we're looking at this contextual analysis, and we're looking through all the different parts of that person's life and putting a bigger picture together in which those responses always make sense. I feel that if someone's speaking with me and they're saying something and they go, "Oh, this is crazy. This is weird. This is crazy," and I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, only if I can't connect the context to it.
Right.
Because I have this absolute deep faith that if you can connect the context to the responses, they all make sense eventually. And there's a richness underneath that, and so much meaning. And making meaning is an underestimated, or I think not estimated, but under appreciated sometimes, how important the whole process of meaning making is, and how dependent that is on our contextual factors, like where we are, who we're with, what was happening at the time, the operations of power, what you were trying to consider, who you were trying to protect, all those kind of things. So it makes my work so much more uh, uh, interesting and hopefully helpful to people as well.
Yeah, and well, everything you said is really important. And if I'm trying to understand someone and I need a starting place, I think about the idea of dignity, human dignity, and the
Nice.
dignity of all living things. And we had such rich conversations with you folks around the Maori word mana, which is sort of like how we understand dignity over here. So if I'm kind of entering in a conversation and I don't know where to take it, I'll ask myself, is this person responding in a way to preserve their dignity, to attend to some kind of humiliation, or to maximize safety for themselves? And I'm just wondering what you, how you engage with this idea of dignity or mana.
Yeah, I think the way that in my own way, the way I do that, and I've written a little bit about this as well, is that I maintain the position of the person as a living, breathing, embodied, responsive, intelligent social navigator. And to me, when I'm doing that, I am upholding dignity because I'm upholding the competence of that person and the competence of their responsiveness as well. And it's deeply painful, at times when sometimes your responses are not what you would wish them to be. Yeah, there's a lot at stake. So yeah, and the word mana has a lot of, it's a complex word in itself, and more than I can even appreciate, to be fair. But mana is not something that can be really taken away in a sense. It's kind of your modi, it's kind of part of your life force as I understand it, but I'm not really the right person to talk about that. My expertise not robust enough for that
But you're a
conversation.
dignified person, and you take
Try.
great care to make others around you feel comfortable and welcome, as I've noticed.
Well, hopefully with a bit of music and humor, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see how people position themselves. I don't know what you think about this, but often I've seen people come either to talk to me, just like, in social settings, because they know I'm a counselor and they start talking or, opening up, or even in the counseling room. Um, they'll use certain words and that they are using them because they want to show you that they're a smart person, and they've Googled the things that could be wrong with them. So they might come in and say, hey, I want you to know that I have trauma, or I have a borderline personality disorder. And I
Or
think,
ADHD. Yeah.
yeah, and I've
Yeah.
noticed, and I wonder about how people start using these terms actually to deflect and protect themselves. Because if they say, I have childhood trauma or whatever, for me now I read that as yeah, so I don't really want to talk about it with you, so just like respect my boundary and know that that's all I'm going to say about it. And I understand it as some bad stuff happened, and that they probably didn't get the care and positive social response that they needed. But I'm just wondering how you engage with people who are engaging with these psychological terms that are all over the place in the culture, but don't actually get down to the brass tacks, which is they were mistreated and they responded in some way, and they often tried to resist the mistreatment in the best way they could in the moment, regardless of how old they were. And that was really important, what they did, and that most people don't ask them about that, right?
Yeah, I think that we're really up against it with a lot of that psychocolonized language. And wherever you have an abstract, you lose detail.
Mhm.
So, you know, these psychological abstracts or, you know, are basically, you know, shortcuts to saying something, but who knows what? They're not a very good description of anything really necessarily. And people are quite attached to them too, and get quite upset if you that conversation carefully, because I think people are quite, you know, taken by those kind of psychologized ideas, and it gives meaning to the experience in at some level. But you're absolutely right. It kind of lacks what it doesn't do is it lacks detail, and when you have something, you can no longer look at how you're responding to something. Um, so when people come to me and they may say, "Oh, I have this or that," you know, first of all, dignity is important.
Mhm.
So I'm like, "Oh, wow." Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about
Yeah.
that. You know, so yeah, because I want to get some, yeah, I want to understand that in the context of their lives, and that's actually more important than, you know, trying to have some sort of debate. I mean, I think if I'm outside of the room with friends and colleagues, sure, I will be, we'll have a slightly different kind of conversation about that, or with supervisees as well.
Mhm.
Um, but generally speaking, you know, yeah, dignity comes first, right?
Mhm. I
Yeah.
was going to ask you about some of your favorite like therapeutic questions, but it's so great because when you say, tell me about that, it's not even a question, it's just a polite request for information, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
questions
I
are,
mean, sometimes you can say, can I ask you, could I ask you a question about that? Or, um, you know, is that something you want to talk about? Or, you know, and of course you're gauging the whole response, not just the answer, you know, when somebody says, oh, yeah, it's like, okay. So yeah, it's like it's the answer is more than the language itself as well. Of course, it's the whole person, the embodied response, and embodied responsiveness, which kind of makes me think about my practice a little bit too, which is it okay to
yeah, yeah.
talk a little bit about that too?
Mhm.
So I was very fortunate that when I was about 18 years of age, and I'm ancient now, so that was a long time ago. At the time I was living as a homeless person, and which was more like a gypsy, I would say, than a homeless person, but um, came across vipassana meditation. And it's a 10-day intensive kind of retreat. The way I came across it was quite remarkable in itself. I'd been visiting a friend, I hadn't seen for a little while in the room. And as I walked into the room, I just kind of felt this sense of energy, but it was very peaceful. And I kind of looked at my friend and I said, "Hey, what's up?" And they're like, "Nothing, I'm all good." And I'm like, "No, something's different." And then we're like, eventually they kind of said, "Oh, well, I've just been on this 10-day Vipassana retreat." And I'm like, I didn't even care what it was about. I wanted that. Whatever that was, I wanted it.
Oh,
I didn't care if it was a cult. I was going.
mhm.
Which is kind of interesting because at the time, politically, I was a punk. I still kind of have some of those leanings, but um, so I went and did these enthralling 10-day silent retreat, where I learned to observe my breathing, where I learned to observe my body, and in doing so, of course, learning to observe my responses to things, my embodied responses to things, and allowing that kind of process of allowing things to kind of arise and pass. And in terms of a practice, I don't know, it aligns in a way therapeutically, personally for me, because it gives me a way of being able to be with my embodied responsiveness in a very particular kind of way, with a lot of alertness, but also with a lot of peace. At times, it's not always peace. Sometimes it's pain, but it's a practice, you know, it's a practice which is you know, a life practice.
Mhm.
I don't know if I see it as a religion or spirituality even, although I think there's definitely some interesting things that you can observe when you've been doing something like that for 10 days. But I think mostly the two important things to me in my life is my work, because my work is about being in service to people.
Mhm.
And being in service to people is the most important thing to me, next to the practice that I have, which is to be okay with being with myself. And the better I can do that, I hope the more warm and genuine and loving I can be in my presence with other people as well. Uh, so that's the journey. It has its ups and downs.
Well, there's a number of things there that really stand out to me, and one is like this, um, just being in a process where you notice like the energy or the feeling around you. You notice on a both a micro and a macro level what's going on, or things are alive, our body parts are alive, and so what is my what is my heart saying, or what is my liver doing, or
Mhm.
my legs. And so you're looking at how your body's responding to all sorts of things, and you're learning about how you can um, have some agency over that to
Yeah,
work things.
that's
You've
it.
got an inner radar that helps
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
you safe. And you also found a community, which is really important for that collective care, hey? Sort of.
I don't know, not so much about community, but I think you hit a really good point there, is that, the whole thing about responding to things is that it's natural to respond in certain ways. Uh, but we still want sometimes to have some agency about that.
Mhm.
And I think that's why we're going to be really careful in response-based ideas, not to kind of say things, well, like that's a reasonable response. Like, I don't know that that's helpful to say that, because it could be patronizing for a start, but it also closes down a conversation for a second. Like, just because it's a reasonable response doesn't mean we're happy about it either, you know. And we still might want to have some sort of agency. So how do I be with that and still have agency? And when you don't shut the conversation down and you continue to have search for that detail, you find it, and it's there. But you won't find it unless you expect it to be there, you know?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
again, even in the words of in the language of response-based practice, we could practice inadvertently or unintentionally abstractions by just saying response all the time. Oh, that was a
Yeah.
response. So I think it's important not to get captured even by that, and try and keep, for me, sorry, I say we, I mean me, it's important to me um, that's what I'm doing, is trying to always look for detail. But it's not just like being a dog with a bone. It's about dignity, because the person you're speaking with, I'm in service to, and so how that happens is really important. And often, I mean, my office and my wife's office are very close together. I get a lot of complaints, I have to say. I get lots and lots of complaints coming, and the complaint is usually like, there's way too much laughter coming from your guys' room.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and there is laughter, and we're talking about the most meaningful, serious, hurtful experiences at the same time. And yeah, it's very humbling. Yeah.
Yeah, do you mind if I just go back to the topic of breath for a moment? Because in
Yeah,
many
sure.
cultures, it's also the same word for spirit, or
Ah,
spire, like inspire, conspire. Um,
ah,
and when I think of the sort of typical neuropsych, like freeze, fight, and
uh,
flight, like as if there's only like 3 or 5 ways that a person can respond to something. Many people will say, "Oh, I just froze," and then we think with the breath, and we think, "Okay, well, can you tell me a little bit about that? Like tell me more about that. How did you make your body so still that it was like you were frozen?" And they'll talk about that,
mm,
and then we'll say, "How did you make your breath so still that nobody would notice, your chest rising and falling, or they wouldn't hear, like you're trying to not be detected?" And that takes, so much attention, mastery, wherewithal. So ask, how did you do that? And you see so much action and activity. So you just like open the door on that word freeze and show that actually it's something a person decided to do, not that they were overcome and couldn't move. Does that resonate for how you think
Yeah,
of?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really enjoyed Linda Coates' conversation about that at was it Mind the Gap or what? I can't remember. It was ages ago, and she talked about being on her horse and all of that kind of. I can't remember all the details of it, but I really enjoyed that kind of way of looking at it. And breath is for me, it can be an anchor of sorts in my experience.
Yeah.
So it can kind of bring me present because breath is something autonomously, but can also happen deliberately, right? So being able to bring choice to the breath is helpful as an anchor to being here. But then what do I do with that is also really important. I think just on a slightly a side note, I actually feel quite offended by the way that psychiatry has annexed mindfulness. Um, and I find it hugely offensive how it's done that. And the reason I find it hugely offensive is because it's annexed a small part of it and disregarded all the rest.
Mhm.
Because really it starts with try and be a good person first. You know,
Yeah.
work on that. So it's just it is what it is. But we're really up against it. I think you're right with psychology, psychiatry,
Mhm.
and the psychocolonization and how that's over here it's absolutely aligned as a tool of colonization as well. Um,
Mhm.
and it's so pervasive. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
a form of cultural appropriation. Like you say,
that's it.
it's
Yeah,
devoid of the context and meaning and
yeah.
doesn't mention the teachers. Like I'm always suspicious about ceremonies or whatever you're doing if people don't quote their sources. They don't say where they learned how to facilitate this process or this ceremony
Mm.
and name the people that either taught them or passed on traditional knowledge or gave them permission. That's so important, right? This lineage of ideas. And I think that's why you mentioned that you had wished that you studied family therapy, because there's a real rich origin of ideas and practices there that kind of rejected psychiatry. Hey?
Yeah, 100%. And so I undertook a process in my own personal supervision with Shelley, and Shelley's been the most amazing support to me around de-psychoanalyzing or doing my bits of de-psychoanalyzing myself. And I started writing some stuff around that too. And when I'm writing, I'm really just kind of doing it for my own kind of personal journal. But sometimes people find it interesting and want to read it or kind of look over my shoulder and say, "Oh, that looks interesting." I'm like, okay, sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, I lost track. Where were we going? Sorry.
Yeah, well, you said we, and then you corrected, I mean I, but I think like to pick up on that word of, conspire or conspiracy. I love it. It means people that breathe together. And I think you are part of a community in which I'm also a part of, people that practice response based practice, but not just that, that appreciate that wherever there's mistreatment, there's resistance, and resistance can't be pathologized or evaluated, like you say, understanding that humans are agentive and spirited, and that we should be looking at social interaction, not just what's going on in the mind of a person who's been harmed, right? There's a little
Oh,
story.
100%, 100%. That is the work, right?
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it's such an honor. It's such an honor and a privilege to do this work.
Yeah, it feels good, doesn't it? Like it's a nice way to be with people, I think.
Yeah, I think, prior to coming in contact with some like these ideas, I think I'd already been trying really hard to work in this kind of direction, but it's kind of, I guess all the pieces, a lot of the pieces fell together when I started to kind of come across some of these ideas. I mean, I'd already was kind of narrative focused to some degree. I'd done some training with Michael White and Janella Bird earlier on, 20 odd years ago, and it was great and very helpful. And I think that whole idea around objectification was something that I was already kind of very much kind of struggling around and with, and then these ideas came along, and it was just like, thank you. Thanks, guys. You just kind of nailed it. That's exactly what I was trying to say, trying to figure out, and here it is. And I know 100% that my practice changed for better the same day, because I was working the day that I think I saw Alan back in, was it 12 years ago, and I had to go back to work, and in that very next kind of conversation already improved by 50%, I'm sure.
Oh,
You know,
marvelous. Yeah.
and I haven't looked back since, because
Yeah.
I've just kind of kept trying, keep working. I mean, the ideas themselves, I think, are not too difficult to difficult to grasp, but I think where it is a little bit more nuanced is how to. And I guess that's where I'm focused at, and in the future, where if I do some sharing of ideas with groups of people or training workshops, that's kind of what I want to try, and I'm kind of developing ideas about how to do that, how to share those ideas about some of the ways to do things without it becoming an ABC 1, 2, 3 step kind of thing, but because you really can't entirely, I don't think you should or could entirely
Mhm.
mythologize. What's the word? Turn into some sort of manualize. That's the word I
Right.
was thinking
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
of.
Well, if you asked Alan, what's a good textbook I could read? Of course, he would say memoir. Read memoir, uh,
Yeah.
biography of activists, political prisoners, genocide survivors. You know, Black anti-slavery activists, women. Like now LGBTQ, two-spirit folks, people that have had to resist just to stay alive, and it becomes part of who they are, like that. This is our learning, right? These are our teachers, indigenous people. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Going through adversity, you learn what you're capable of, but it's not as though you really wanted to go through adversity to learn that, right? I can remember I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they weren't directing this at me, but they were kind of saying, where their response to people was sometimes was like, "Don't congratulate me on being strong."
Yeah.
Like, I never wanted to be strong,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, don't call me resilient, we hear that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
never wanted to be. I never wanted to have to be resilient,
Yeah.
because, and then now we're speaking about what they're responding to, and we're bringing the violence and the adversity back into the picture, whereas that's often dropped out of the picture, and just the person's response is what's visible, and then
Yeah.
that becomes pathologized, right?
Yeah, and that kind of reflection is more meaningful to people when you notice actually what they did, and become curious about, like, they were
Mm.
thinking, how they were making meaning of the situation, and yeah, thinking about their dignity and safety. Like the particulars um, give us more information about the spirit of that person, rather than just like these um, generalized terms, like he's so strong, she's so resilient, whatever, right?
Yeah.
About action and interaction.
Yeah. What happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was going through your mind at the time? Where
Yeah.
were you? Who was there?
What did you do next? Yeah.
What were you anticipating?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
like one of the biggest the most important response-based question is probably, like when he did that to you, like, how did you respond? Like, what did you do? Something like that, really colloquial and right in the action, right?
And 9 times out of 10, well, I didn't do anything.
Exactly.
It's like,
And then we say,
I
how
thought-
did you do nothing? Tell it.
yeah, right.
How
You,
did
you
what
don't,
did that look like? If I was a
right?
fly on the wall and I was watching, what
Yeah.
would I notice about you? And
Yeah.
if you were unhappy or outraged and I was that fly on the wall, what would I notice about your face? What would your
Yeah.
eyes be saying? It
We don't drop the question, in other words, right? Like we just keep going with it. But I mean, being outraged is a response, and perhaps even a form of resistance itself. I mean, always been careful not to name other people's resistance, of course. Sometimes you can carefully a way of disagreeing or resisting that. But obviously feeling bad about something doesn't mean that you agree with it, right? So
Mhm.
is that not at some level a form of resistance?
Refusing to be contented.
Yeah, there you go. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And lots of those other similar ways of saying that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Mm. Cool.
Well, is this a good place to wrap up for today?
Yeah, it feels like it, hey? Thank you so much.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing about some of your personal process, your learning and things that have become important to you along the way in doing this kind of work and activity. Mm.
Much. I really didn't have any idea what we were going to talk about today. So,
Yeah.
so it was interesting where we ended up. Appreciate it's just really lovely to see you, Cathy. And yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And please give my very best wishes to all our friends and colleagues in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
I will do. Thank you so much, Cathy.